So the first thing the ACCA says is, think about how well did you perform in the relevant F-level paper. So if you did really well in F5, for example, then that would be a good indicator that you should do P5. If you didn't do well in F5, then perhaps P5 isn't for you. So that's the first thing to think about. The second thing is experience at the workplace. So are you actually working in this area in your job, or do you have some experience in this area? I mentioned in auditing, for example, if you have auditing experience, then P7 might well be relevant. If you don't have any experience at the workplace, that would suggest you're less likely to pass the exam. Now, I mentioned here a link with the ACCA competency framework. I don't know if you actually know what the ACCA competency framework is, but hopefully you do. The way it works is that in order to qualify with the ACCA, once you pass your exams, you then have to show that you also have the practical experience. You have to satisfy these practical experience requirements. And these are all laid out within the ACCA competency framework. But the point is that some of these PERs are optional, so you can choose which of those you want to try to achieve. And what the ACCA suggests is that you should choose the same papers that would match the practical experience requirements that you're going for, because then that's more likely to be something that matches the work that you're doing in your job. So that's something to think about. They also ask you to think about your future career prospects. So, maybe you're working in an auditing firm now, but maybe you would like to go and work in an investment bank later on. If that's the case, then perhaps P4 might be relevant to you. So, do think about that. But on the other hand, do also bear in mind, if you think you don't have much chance of passing P4 today, you could always do it later on, once you pass ACCA, because once you pass ACCA, you still have to do continuing professional development. So the fact that you don't do a paper now doesn't mean you couldn't still study for that later on. So those are a few things the ACCA mention. A couple of other things they also mention is don't try to do too many papers at one time. Sometimes people like to do 3 or 4 papers in a sitting, but perhaps when you get to this level, it might be worth just doing 2 papers. So in other words, if you're already doing, if you've still got papers to do from the compulsory part of the ACCA scheme, perhaps wait till you finish those before you do the optional papers. So just give yourself plenty of time to study for these. And the other thing which I also mentioned earlier was, do give yourself time to revise those earlier papers. What if you don't have relevant experience? Perhaps you have relevant experience for P7, but not for P5 and P4. So you're going to have to do at least one paper that you don't have relevant experience for. Well, you're not, it's not a complete disaster. You can work around this. The first thing you can do is to read around the subject itself. Now, the ACCA, as you know from earlier papers, does publish a lot of technical articles. When you're at the P level, it's much more important to read those articles than it is at the F level, because at the P level you're supposed to have a much broader knowledge of the subject. So do read those ACCA technical articles, and at the end of those ACCA technical articles they often give you recommended reading or further reading, so you could perhaps read those as well. It's also important at the P level to have a good knowledge of the business environment, what's actually happening in the real world. And the place to get that is by reading a good business newspaper. For example, I like to read the Financial Times. Now, I don't read the Financial Times every day, to be honest, but I might pick up a Financial Times once a week and just scan through it, and that's a good way to keep my business knowledge up to date. Or even surfing the internet, going through the web and looking at the business news on the web. So just try and be aware of what's going on in the real world, because you'll find that helps you when you're looking at the more theoretical things within the papers. Attend talks given by practitioners. Sometimes practitioners like to advertise their own services by offering free talks, free lectures. So if you see any free lectures advertised, go along and listen to them. I remember recently there was somebody doing a lecture in the town where I live on the school card, and that guy was obviously just trying to sell his services at a management consultant, but it was useful for me, so I went along and listened, and it was good. It gave me some practical things. And of course, these days with the internet, there's lots of accessibility of case studies and those types of things. So, there's plenty of information to try to just get a bit more of a practical knowledge of what's, the theories that you've been learning from your study manuals. Okay. One other thing I should mention, actually, which I forgot to mention, is that the ACCA recommend attending courses by a accredited tuition provider, of which, of course, Becker is one. Now, I'm not just saying that to advertise our services, but I do appreciate as a tutor that sometimes people come to me and say, well, actually, Nick, I prefer to study on my own. And I say, that's absolutely fine. I appreciate that. And I think for the F level, that's absolutely fine. But I think when you come out to the P level, you do need that extra bit of help, because I think the value that we can offer you is we can help you develop those higher skills that you need to pass these exams. Because, as I've said, the P level papers, it isn't just about the knowledge, it's also about being able to apply the knowledge in the exam. So, so do attend a course if you can.